So how did your character develop in the second season?
Oh, he doesn't.
Thanks very much.
I thought best to just get that out of the way.
Alright, that was a good thing.
Yeah, no, I don't do development. No.
Did you get a different cape maybe with a uniform?
A different cape, yeah.
Different colour cape maybe?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Nazi party night, which is in episode 6, that's when I had my... I'm joking. I just saw that. I mean, yes. I mean, there is development, but, you know, this is why you know, I watch these interviews and I think about actors. Why do you have to use words like arc and going on a journey and all this stuff? And I realise now, as I tell you that my character goes on a journey, that it's because I can't really go into specifics without ruining it. So some stuff happens. They have an effect on him. Do I go? I'm not at liberty to say whether I climb into an arc or not. I would be giving away a key plot line. There are no Nazi floods. Yeah. But no, I mean, a lot of stuff happens. A lot of the story that's set up, the key problems for him that are set up at the end of the first season, take a long time and get bigger and bigger through the course of the second season as he ascends the hierarchy, the ladder, and in the Reich. He's already very high, but he ends it having pleased the boss, and that continues. He's given greater responsibility to support and protect the Reich, as that same thing is on the verge of devouring his son, and those two things clash. So there's that going on.
Big conflict still, obviously, with the family side of, I guess, because when you first see him, you think obviously, you know, he's a monster, but there's a human
he's
side. He's not
a monster, he's a human
side. No, but when
no, he's not a monster, he's a human. Yes. The only people who do this shit are humans. There are no monsters. No, it's very important. There are no monsters. There's people. And we're in a place now, we're at Comic-Con now, where half of this business is about taking real evil things and turning them into cartoons. I mean, there's an appetite for it, particularly at the moment, interestingly enough. That why is it that Nazis are so prone to being rendered, you know, space Nazis, zombie Nazis, vampire Nazis, ghost Nazis? Why do they have to be supernatural? Because the reality is, it was people in this room. If everyone in this room right now had been in Germany, some of them wouldn't have lasted longer than others. I mean, but it was just terrifying what happened, because, yes, the people who started the Nazis, the original Nazis, were obviously really misshapen, super fucked up, okay? But then the entire country went with it. Now that's crazy. Like, people say, oh, what would you have done? Oh, I'd have left the country, I'd have done this and done that. Hitler said something really, really frightening when talking about dissidents, people who didn't like him. He said, I don't worry about these old people who say they don't like me, I have their children. And you hear that and you just think, fuck, I've got their children, I've got their wives, I've got their parents. Are you going to leave? You know, and you think of it that way, the whole country, people who otherwise weren't necessarily anti-Semitic, weren't necessarily, you know, all went along with it. The first thing they did was they cut off access to news from the rest of the world. So from 1932 onwards, everyone in Nazi Germany believed that everyone was out to get them. They wanted to, you know, everyone, there's the Poles, they finally thought they were sticking up for themselves, because everyone in the country had been convinced.
Pretty much a propaganda machine, really.
Absolutely. Do you know something? Goebbels, who was head of propaganda, only at the end of the war did the German people suddenly stop believing the news. They believed all the way through because the war hadn't touched them. You know, what Hitler told them seemed true, but then the bombers started coming. Then the Russians were coming, and they realized that they'd been sold a lie. The only way that Goebbels could still influence public opinion, the horoscopes. This is actually official. They used the horoscopes in the national newspapers to bend public opinion.
Wow.
You know, Scorpios, you may feel down, but just stick in there, you know, whatever. I mean, that level of mind control it happens everywhere. You know, led to Brexit. It can lead to anything. No, it's true. It's true.
So, playing this character, playing Obergruppenführer John Smith, you know, we were talking with Alexa and DJ, and they said they really became custodians of their character. So
They really became what?
custodians of their character.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
How have you felt sort of growing with this role, you know, building it from the inside out? Like, how was that development process for you?
Well, I mean, one of the extraordinary things about this job is that we really have been trusted with our input. That not only is it wasn't just, you know, indulged. We weren't just indulged and put up with, but actually it was very important and vital part of the process. After a while, the way we work with Frank Spotnitz is that, you know, I would have regular calls with him when he was in Paris or London, whatever, every weekend to talk through the scripts, to make suggestions, to ask questions. And after a while, it became very much needed by both of us. That was like part of the script process. I wasn't the only person doing it. And it's because they very quickly realised that this wasn't actors trying to gain advantage for themselves, but people who would rather play a small part in an episode if it made that episode a better thing, you know, because we'd all rather, this was our chance to be in something we really cared about that actually meant something morally, even though it's about what it's about it to a better purpose, I think. So I just really wanted to be in something I was really proud of, so that gives you a lot of fight. And luckily everyone feels the same way, and there wasn't even one person in there who was like, yeah, but could you give me a close-up here, you know. Everyone pretty much, really, really smart people felt the same way, so, you know.
Now, you seem very well versed on just that span of German history from 39 to 45. Would you say your character resembles someone in the Nazi hierarchy, someone like Goebbels, Goering?
Absolutely not.
No, would he be more like the German generals Rommel and Desert Fox?
No. For me, I would say, I mean, maybe ultimately he's a mix of a lot of things, but for me, I've read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, but the book that was most interesting for me was Albert Speer's autobiography. Albert Speer wasn't an anti-Semite. He was an intellectual. He was the intellectual of the Nazi Party. He was Hitler's architect, but because he was so incredibly smart and very good at problem solving, he ended up being his armaments minister. And he was incredibly close, and he wasn't executed because he had no part in the final solution. And he spent 20 years in Spandau and wrote an autobiography, which for me was fascinating, how someone tells themselves, how someone goes through that and thinks they're not a bad guy. You know, and he didn't think he was a bad guy, but there was a moment when he realised he crossed over the line, and he had 20 years to think about it. When someone said to him towards the end of the war, he didn't know, for example, what was happening to the Jews, but there was a point when he suspected if he asked a certain question of a certain person, he might get an answer that he didn't like, so he never asked the question. When someone said to him, like 1944, came back from Poland very disturbed and said, if you ever get asked to visit a place called well, I can't remember which. I think it was Auschwitz. If you ever get a chance to visit Auschwitz, don't go. And he didn't ask why. And he didn't ask Hitler, who he saw every day. He just decided that he wasn't going to go there. And that's what people do. They just decide where they're not going to look, you know. And so for him, that was very interesting, because someone who otherwise would have been a completely different kind of person manages to go that route, rather than someone who just naturally has a kind of militaristic bent or likes uniforms or is like really into that shit. Someone who otherwise would not have been that guy. That's what I was thinking of, you know.
I mean, without giving anything away, because obviously you can't, but we're going to see other parts of Germany, obviously, and other parts of the world of The Man in the High Castle in the second series. And visually they're going to have a similar flavour to the things that we saw in the first, in terms of their approach and their tone.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what's really important is that in the same way as exploring the alternate histories within the history, that you've got to be quite judicious and not spread it too thin, because if you basically, it's like can happen with a movie, it's too many flashbacks, too many flash forwards, too many what ifs, and you end up losing any faith in the currency of the moment. You just think, I don't know, this is going to be a fucking dream sequence, I'm not going to invest in this anymore.
Right.
You know? So they're being very careful with how they eke that out, and the same way geographically they're going into Berlin, they're going slowly, but I think what they want to do is just make sure that they get deep with the characters first rather than spread it out too thin, too wide, and I think that's very wise. I mean, what it does count on is it being a multi-season, so we're hoping that we'll be given the chance to do that, but I think that would be the wrong way to go, is to just like go everywhere in the world very quickly, you know, especially if you don't have the story to cover it. You've got to, you know, I don't think anything is served well by having a load of superficial characters in a new place.
Well, I think that makes one of the great things about the show is that it deals so much with the person. It would be too broad to go, like you said, too far too early. And so your story is one of the most interesting because he is the only one with his children, who are one of who is actually affected by it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it looked like in the trailer that's the doctor that you might be killing in the car.
Could be just giving him a little cuddle. Yeah, we could be necking. Who knows? Maybe this is one of the things I'm not telling you about. Yeah, when I told you I went on a journey. But yes, I can't remember, what was the question?
Well, just can you talk about that story? What can you tell us about?
I can't really tell you much, other than the fact that you know, it goes. It's like one of the main storylines for my character. There are a few, and it goes. But for me, that was the most important thing, was the human side of it. You know, I mean, I suppose to a certain extent I'm really campaigning for my character to be there's the uniform, which is a big statement, but it's the least interesting because that's just a bit of cloth. It's the human that's interesting. And I always, you know, this is an analogy I used in the writers' room when I was talking to them about when I was making my case, that if you're doing a question answer and the yeses are on the left and the rights on the no, the no's are on the right, and you're ticking and you find that 3 or 4 or 5 of them are on the left, you think, oh, these are all going to be on the left, you just keep ticking the left. I don't want anyone to do that with the writing or the decisions. That what's definitely on the left would say is the fact that he's a Nazi, his job, his uniform. I want as many ticks as possible to be on the other side. Not because I want to be liked, but then it's interesting. So every time, you know, you're tempted, you see it with day players, people will come in and they would automatically speak like, you know, and the physicality becomes stiff and people become humorless, but all of those things to do the opposite. So it's first and foremost a guy. And I'm at my happiest when Smith is at his most fucked up, generally. Do you know what I mean? It's like, here's this person in power, now let's see how we can really screw that up. You know.
So it's interesting to note that in the trailer when we see the split screen, you know, there's Obergruppenführer.
Yeah, it took me by surprise, that.
And then you see on the other side, he's not in uniform. So, you know, part of me wonders, do you feel like the military aspect of John Smith is integral to the character, or do you think he's a character that sort of went into the Nazi Third Reich?
I don't know. I find it hard to answer a question based, for example, triggered by that thing, because I didn't even know that was part of the trailer when we were shooting it. I just told it was a shot for the, you know, I thought it was something to do with advertising. And then it's at the end of like, okay, fair enough, but I'm not going to base any discussion about my character on that image that was someone's idea that I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I wouldn't say that the character was one thing on one side and one thing on another. He's both things on both sides. There's a little bit of good in the soldier and there's a little bit of bad in the dad, and vice versa. It's all grey. It's all, as Marlon Brando would say, it's a polka dot world. Do you know what I mean? And I think the Nazi world has, what it does is it brutalizes. It brutalizes. What's interesting about it is society brutalizes. We all brutalize in different ways. Like, their holidays, just like ours in England and yours, are often like the flowers you put on top of a burial pile. Do you know what I mean? It's like often you look deep into a national holiday and it's a celebration of a culling of some kind. And the Nazis were no different. And the people are having their celebratory dinners. And if the children ask, what is it that we celebrate? It's, I grew up, Guy Fawkes Day, celebrating the burning
Of Parliament.
the burning to death of someone who tried to, make a revolt against, wow. I mean, and that was a fun thing you get kids to do,
It's sheer transformation.
Yeah, it's what people do, so there are similarities. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but the points where the world we live in intersects with this, the similarities are very telling, particularly now.
I mean, do you think it's interesting that the reason why the series works is because rather than it being a very fantastical series, it's like the world's taken a step to the left or a step to the right, into the shadows, and you've got this world which doesn't feel that dissimilar, it doesn't feel like it's that divorced, it feels like it's a world that could exist if things were different.
Absolutely. But the thing is, there's certain things, obviously, horrors have occurred. But we've just, there are horrors in our world that we've just got used to. Do you know what I mean? And not to say that it isn't a worse world. Yeah, you become inured, or we've had long enough to turn them into national holidays. That's the point I'm making. I'm not arguing for a second that this is not worse in a million ways, but I think it's very interesting and very timely, and I think I've always considered it to be my responsibility to try to play Smith. That's why I argue that he's not a monster, because I think it's my exactly, and I think Nazism is monsterish, and it brings out the monster in people.
They're not monsters, they're people, and that's what's made them so scary, because they're like your neighbour, they're like the man who runs a shop jump. It could be anyone.
Yes, but a serial killer is often an aberration. Nazism was not an aberration. Nazism nearly took over the world. I mean, this wasn't someone gets a knock over the head and they're not the same little boy anymore, and then they start to kill cats and whatever. I mean, I'm not just reducing it all to that, but
it's a progression. It's a natural progression just based on things that are said and things that are shown.
Yeah, exactly. And then suddenly it becomes normal for people to have dehumanized a sector of society, so that killing them isn't the same as killing someone who looks like them.
Yeah, I mean that's unfamiliar, but
yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. It happens all the time. It's very familiar.
What you have to remember is history is written by the winners.
of course,
yeah. Well, that's why, for example, the scenes, I argue this very strongly, that in the Man in the High Castle world, they wouldn't have the knowledge of Auschwitz, etc., that we have. They would have been able to concoct any most people in Germany could choose to believe that their old German friends or whatever had gone away, that they've been shipped away, and lots of people were able to believe that. There were certain people that suspected there was more, but this is the whole country, whole world that were told that story. Because the GIs didn't go into Pels. That never happened.
Right.
Thank you very much.
It's a head fuck.
Yeah, I mean, we love to ask more, but say it's last question with that. It's actually good talking because I'm kind of glad you came in with this historical.
Yeah.
I'm kind of history buff myself, so hearing you talk is ooh, I'm interested.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject. Yeah. I mean, for me, a chance to educate myself. No, I wasn't interested so much in other alternate histories. I wanted to read. I might now because it's a wonderful book that I've heard a lot about. But for me, finding out about what really happened and the journey of normal people into what happened to 1945 and how that could happen to an entire country.
Mind blowing, right?
Mind blowing. And I think if we manage to tell ourselves that it only happens to werewolves and zombies, I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors.
Right.
Well, I think that's why those stories work, because it uses, even in a fantastical world, it's important to bring it back to reality in some ways, that you can see the echoes of your world in it.
Yeah.
But I think that is why this show is so interesting, because it isn't the fantastical.
But
one thing was
also
different.
somehow the one remove can show you you're present, and when they say a mask tells you more than a face, you know, and actually it's,
Especially considering so much of what's happening in the world right now.
yes, it's true.
Are you excited for your fans' reaction when they see what happens?
I don't know, I haven't seen it myself, so I'm too neurotic to be purely excited about anything. Yeah, I'm excited, bemused, worried, you know, all of those things.
Are you able to watch your work?
I've gone into the habit of not watching actually. But then, you know, you'll do a panel and they'll stick something up and you have to go, oh, Jesus, you have to watch it in front of 800 people. And I'm like, that's something. Yeah, exactly. Give me neck ache as well. All right.
Thank
Thank you very much.